So this process of caring for the soul it's not as simple as it sounds, believe me. Now, I just want to say one more thing, and talk one more area here, because we're here at Schumacher and talking about nature. I want to tell you one other story, too. It seems to me that one of the reasons that we're aggressive toward nature, that the natural world is out there, and we do not treat it well as a society. Individually we may, but as a society we obviously do not. Even though it is self-destructive not to take care of nature. There's a great deal of anger and frustration, it seems to me, we take out on nature. It is my view, and I'm happy to see that this is what I like about coming to Schumacher, is that we can look at this point of view as well here. That until we deal with our own natures, our own human nature, and can, as I said, dance with it and move with it gracefully, with some grace, I don't see how we can take care of the natural world around us. In other words, I don't think that we can have a lot of people who are not caring for their own souls. I don't think, unless they do that, unless we do that, I don't see how we're going to take care of nature. I think it starts, in a way, with our own nature, so that that nature and this nature overlap or are the same thing or are connected. Because if we have a lot of frustration and anger, because we haven't dealt with these issues for ourselves and have not learned to move and to move gracefully with all these demands on us, then we're going to be angry at that nature, because that's us. That beautiful tree out there is me too. And as so many early theologians used to say, Origen, this great theologian, said, each of us has a sun and a moon and the stars in us. We're that same world. That world is in us. And if we don't take care of it in us, we're not going to take care of it out there. We're not going to take care of it out there. And I think to do that, really the process for ourselves has got to be some kind of detachment from self, which paradoxically, as so many religions suggest, goes along with an increase of soul. It's so interesting that we can have more life in us and less ego. Although generally I think we don't get that right. We think it's the other way around. But that's what the religions teach, and I think they're right. That the more we can let this ego go, the more sense of life and vitality we will have. The focus and the center of our identity will not be the ego. It will not be narcissistic, especially, which is a symptom of the secular society. It will not be, how am I doing? And am I better than somebody else? It won't be that kind of thing, or insisting and displaying how good I am because I don't feel much. I don't feel much life in me. It won't be that kind of thing, but rather the focus will be deeper, so that we can feel that we really have a weight, we have life in us, we really have some life in us, but not much ego, which is a whole different way of being. We don't have to have life in us at the expense of somebody else. In fact, just the opposite. We have more life in us when we see that others have life in them. And paradoxically, the more we can be with somebody else, being with them as they try to find more vitality for themselves, we find more soul for ourselves. Another paradox. So interesting. And all of that comes out of a kind of diminishment of self. A diminishment of self. There's a story that, and I'll finish with this story, a story that a friend of mine who's a rabbi writes in one of his books. It's a Jewish story. There was a holy Jewish man, a rabbi, who was considered the holiest man in his community, and people wanted to follow him and be close to him because of his holiness. And he was out riding in a carriage one day, and he's riding along, and this big crowd of people starts following the carriage, just wanting to be there. And they're making a lot of noise. He can hear them behind it. So he has a companion in the carriage, and he says, "What is all that racket?" And his companion said, all those people, they just want to be closer to holiness. He said, oh. He opened up the door of the carriage and got out and started running with all the people behind the empty carriage. It's that emptying. It's that kenosis, that emptying of the self. I think that's the key to the increase in soul and the key to caring for the soul. So thank you. We will have a discussion.
Okay.
Good. That's a really good question. That means it's a question I don't know how to answer. I remember very well my first lesson in what the soul is. I was told that the soul is a little piece of cotton that's white when you're born and gradually gets gray and, dirty as you go. I felt by 6 that mine was pretty black. That was the feeling I had from all that time. Well, that's where I started. Yes, I started with that kind of thing. What happened, it reminds me of, what happened I think was expressed by a friend of mine who wrote an essay I liked very much called Ruined by Reading. I was ruined by reading. That was ruined. I have lived pretty much an intellectual life. I know you're not supposed to do this, but I have. I mean, the intellectual life has been very important to me. I'm not a terribly experiential person. That's why I can't do the experiential things very well at all. But it's the life of reading. And I mean, see, to me, a good day is a day I can sit down with the Greek text and just go over it and translate. I love to translate. That's really, it's a great pleasure for me. So I read a great deal, and that reading had a great impact on me. And I think the first reading I did that really moved me away, I think the first thing, and has stuck with me, I still read constantly today, is Samuel Beckett. I read Beckett's, who's an emptier, He's someone who empties and who loves to empty constantly. And I loved that when I read Beckett. I just loved it. I remember being in college. I was a junior in college or something. I read Beckett's Waiting for Godot. I hadn't seen it yet at that time, and I read it. And immediately I sat down and wrote my version of a play. It was the same thing. It was a copy of Waiting for Godot, and the college printed this play of mine. And I thought it was great, but it was just, just almost word for word, Beckett. But that started me on this emptying thing, which I'm sure is still today. The reason I'd be talking about it tonight, it had such appeal to me. I mean, it's in Beckett, and it's in many places. Then I remember I read Teilhard de Chardin. And that really, he moved me a good notch away from the Catholicism I was brought up in. And he's very close to what we're talking about at Schumacher. Because he was trying to suggest there's a way to be spiritual, as part of this natural world we're in. And that this whole thing is this great process of becoming a human being in immediate relation to the natural world. And I was just thrilled by that. The fact that he was on a list of forbidden books made him a little more appealing to me at the time, I think, because I was at that moment of rebellion. Then I would say the discovery, very important for me, the discovery of Greek tragedy and Greek comedy. It's very, very important in my reading. And I was at Syracuse University doing my doctoral studies. I had to take, I think it was 6 doctoral exams. They were kind of big things. You had to be there all day long, and I don't know how many pages you had to write on these questions. And one of the areas of the questions was called biblical texts. Well, I was finished with the Bible by then. I had read the Bible a lot, and I didn't want to read it anymore. I'd reached my point. And so I went to the dean of the school, and I said, can I consider Greek tragedy as my biblical text? And I thought he was going to just throw me out of the place. And he said, well, why not? I said, why not? So I read closely the Greek texts. This was in a period of kind of a rebellion against Christianity for me. And I read the Greek texts. And I found paganism to be so rich and to be the other side of what I had learned in Catholicism. But see, all of this reading, though, I feel just mirrored what was in me from the beginning anyway. I never felt ascetic. I never, you know, I had all those rules and everything, but I avoided them whenever I could. I was very clever at avoiding as many rules as possible. And so even though I kind of learned how to articulate all of that material, post-Christian material, I had been living it beforehand, and it was a recognition. It was a recognizing that this is who I am when I read it.
So, instead of the white piece of paper, the white piece of cloth that we were told as Catholics was our soul, and you had to keep it as clean as possible.
Yeah.
You're suggesting a much richer, more colourful fabric,
yes,
as it were, for your
yes.
soul. But where does that come from? Is there a pool of soul somewhere, and something is ladled into each one of us?
Yes.
We all get a bit of it, or is it? Do we make our own soul, or do we all have a different soul? And if so, how did it come to be different?
You think I know the answers to all these questions?
I don't want to ask easy questions.
We're not even on the mountaintop, you know. I can only tell you what the great people who know these things apparently have said. One of my trusted sources on the soul is Marsilio Ficino, who was a Italian Renaissance thinker, who when he was, I think he was about 9, when Cosimo de' Medici, who was the wealthy prince of his area, chose him to be his translator and said, "I will give you a villa in Tuscany with wine cellars if you translate Greek and Latin for me." And his father spoke for him and said, "Yes, yes." So he got his villa in Tuscany called Careggi, and he spent his life translating. And somewhere, I think it was because he read Plato so vividly, and he read the magical text that came over. That's a whole story I won't go into, but some magic texts came in from the East to Florence, and Cosimo asked him to translate those. So he did all this translating of rich magical texts and translated all these Greek authors, especially Plato and Plotinus especially, who wrote entirely about the soul. You read Plotinus, the word soul appears about 20 times in every page, and it's a description of the soul. Now Ficino, this is all to say, that Ficino says that a good image for the soul, in contrast to this little piece of white cloth, is the peacock's tail. The cauda pavonis, it was called, the cauda pavonis, the peacock's tail. So it is a tail that has all these multicolored feathers. And the way they would see that, the way he saw it, would be that each feather represented a different planet in the sky. So there's a correspondence between the feather of the peacock and a planet in the sky. So those were the images he used. He also correlated it to the 7 tones of the musical scale, and said that just as you can have 7 notes of a scale and make all this music, that's what the soul is like. So yes, we have much in common. We all have the 7 tones of the scale. We all live under the 7 planets. We can all admire the colors of the peacock's tail, but we each play our own melody and have our own harmonies. So it's the same basic material. And when we talk about archetypal psychology and archetypal studies, as I understand it, the way I do it, is I'm looking for those planetary configurations that are common to us all. There are certain archetypal experiences we have that are common to us all, like those notes. But we each do it in our own way. And so it is a process of this soul material being there for us, but it's our job to make it too, to fashion it for ourselves.
Thank you. Well, now I go on to ask. The soul to me, as a sort of typically modern everyman, as I was called, polite, could be a frightening thing.
Absolutely.
Is it frightening to us, and are we right to be afraid of it?
Oh, it's very frightening. That's a very, very good point. We are afraid of it, and I think that's why we don't care for our souls, and we don't give much attention to the soul, because it is frightening. But what is frightening? To be alive is frightening. To really live is frightening. It's less frightening not to live. That goes back to that discussion about not living. I think the reason we don't, the only reason we don't, is that it's frightening to commit to life, to jump in, to leap into life. It's less threatening to sit back and explore the situation, you know? Analyze for a while and make sure we do the right thing. See, as long as you're interested in doing the right thing, then you cannot really enter, because that will be a habit of not, you know, because living, see, the thing about living this soul life, and if you really live it, you can count on it, you're going to do the wrong thing. You can count on it, you're going to make lots of mistakes. You can bet on that. And so, you don't know exactly what's going to happen, you know, and that's a very frightening thing. I think it's the fear of life that keeps us from really giving in. And yet, you know, it's odd, because that very fear is what I think is at the root of neurosis. It's at the root of feeling life is limited and pinched, and we don't know what to do next, and we're unhappy and depressed. What is depression but that life, that vitality, of being contained and not available? I think that is really one of the best descriptions of depression. That vitality is not there. So it's a very frightening thing, and I don't pretend for a minute that you know, that I can talk about this thing quite easily, but to do it, my gosh, you know, it takes a lot. And for myself, if I give myself to life 4 times out of 10, I'm feeling pretty good about it. It's a frightening thing to do.
Right. So then, do you find a parallel? Say there's an idea that we are spoiling the earth by trying to overexploit it. You said 1 or 2 things about psychology or psychotherapy, which suggests that maybe in some of those personal growth type movements, we are using psychology to exploit the individual and thereby spoil the soul. Is that a correct reading of it?
I think it is. I think that the arrival of a new myth would be the end of psychology. I do. I think that because, and I love the work of psychotherapy. I don't mean that psychotherapy would not be necessary. I think, to me, the establishment, the creation of this field of psychotherapy has been one of the good things we've done. And that's why I spend a lot of time teaching and speaking to therapists. I think it's a very, very important thing. But you know, as I speak to therapists all over the place, I find that at least those coming to me are very, very intensely interested in going beyond what they know as psychology. Now, they may say they want to include spirituality in their work. That's the way that the language they may use. I think it's inaccurate, but I think that's how they say it now. But I think what they're realizing is that this psychological way of being and this notion of every person growing and becoming this better self and this greater self, they realize this is not doing any good. It's not really working in the long run. It's not doing what people want. They have a deeper hunger than that. The hunger is deeper. What is that deeper hunger? Well, there are many ways of describing it. Some people do say there's a hunger for spirit. As I say, I think that's not exactly right, because we are very spirited. We've got lots of spirit in this world. We don't have much soul. We have tremendous spirit everywhere. Every time a rocket is sent up, you know, that's a literal spirit going into the sky. Every time we put up a skyscraper, you know, there's another literalization of spirit. We have spirit everywhere. We don't have much soul, it seems to me. So I think what people are really looking for is this deeper sense of being alive, and life, that the little time we have, we feel in this world, that the time we have is going to be meaningful and fruitful, and we're going to feel that we've spent it well, and that it's been worth living. These are great concerns for us all, especially today when it's very hard to feel like we're individuals and that life is worth living. So yes, I do think that this emphasis on personal growth is really in the wrong direction altogether. It's wrong because it's personal, it's wrong because it's growth. You know? The personal moves away from the soul, and there's no need to grow. You know, we're okay the way we are. We've got everything we need right now. There's no growth needed. You know, there's no need for it. It's another anxiety. I'm not growing. I haven't had a growing experience. quickly, get me to my therapist. You know, I'm not growing. There's no need for that growth. We're all right. Now, I know that things are not all in place. You know, we wish we were less depressed or less neurotic or we had a better marriage or, you know, all these things. I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to have all that stuff. You know, it's just the way it is. And, but as we find this, I think, increase of vitality, we find we can live with all these imperfections. Exactly as Oscar Wilde said. Oscar Wilde, you know, lived this life of pleasure. He says this in one of his letters. He says he lived this life of pleasure all his life. And he broke all the rules, you know, all the time. He just lived for pleasure. And then he spent the last several years of his life in prison. With a great deal of pain, physical pain and emotional pain and isolation and all those things. And he says at the end of his life, both of these were needed. You know, his life would have been incomplete, he says, without that. And this is someone really dedicated to pleasure. So I think we have to have a broad view of what it's not growth, it's a kind of being. It's just being with all this variety and not judging what's good and what's bad and what's healthy and what is not healthy.
Right.
You don't look convinced.
Well, I'm trying to understand. And I was going to ask you to identify those elements of your writing to which people would object. What would your enemies, what would your opposers say to detract from what you say?
Do we have time for this?
I want you to be soulful about it. You know? It's an emptying process.
Yes, it is. Well, my greatest detractors are the Catholic Church. I'm the greatest detractor. I've had the most vicious attacks from the Catholic Church, which is funny because I have such, I mean, I had this little period of rebellion, but I've been very close to Catholic movement since. But I'm attacked a great deal by Catholics. I give you an example. I decided about a year ago to subscribe to a liberal Catholic magazine I used to read many years ago. And I thought I'd like to see what's going on there, you know, so I paid for the subscription to the magazine. I got the magazine in the mail. I opened it up, the first thing I read, I see my name in this magazine. It says, Thomas More, that master of light spirituality, spelled L-I-T-E. Well, this is the Catholic. You see, there are many people who think that what I'm describing, and you may well agree with them, is light. It's not, it doesn't have enough weight, you know? It doesn't have the weight. And I think, I mean, my understanding of what's going on with that charge is that it's true that I'm very interested myself in taking all of those Greek texts that I translate and all those Latin texts and see how they apply day by day in the ordinary person's life. That's my great interest. I'm really interested in doing that. I discovered long ago that it's not in my nature to be able to write an academic book. I can't do it. I tried. I was teaching at a university, and we had to publish in academic journals. And they told me they told me I had to publish there. I tried writing that stuff, and I just couldn't keep my eyes open trying to write it. So I gave up on it. And I'm interested. I like language a great deal, and I try to write books that are legible, I mean, intelligible, and can be read. And that please me, even if they don't please anyone else, please me for their language and ideas and that sort of thing. So I think the greatest charge against me is that what I'm writing is light. I heard from a colleague of mine not long ago. She was in a discussion among psychologists at a university, and they were talking about some ideas. And one person said, they brought my name up and said, well, this is what Thomas More has written about it. And another person there said, but he's on television. He can't, you know, he can't have anything good to say. So there, you see, I have that problem because I've tried to be, I've also tried to speak on radio, television, and, you know, things in those media because I think it's a mistake that we have, I don't know what it's like here, but I know in the United States, the academic world is sealed off from the rest of the society. And there's no intellectual life as a result because there's no cross-fertilization there. There's no interaction between those two. I don't see any contradiction myself in going on a television program and talking about the soul. I can't tell you how many times I've been on radio programs where the announcer will say, Thomas More is now going to talk about the soul, but first, weather and sports. Well, see, that doesn't bother me. That doesn't bother me because that's where we live. I'd rather be in that place, but I think, I may be wrong, but I think the result is then people don't take this work very seriously. There are people who do it, but they're ordinary people, you know. I've had so many just ordinary folks come up and say, and they'll tell me very moving stories like, and I'm just telling you this to show you the contrast. I've had many people come to me and say things like, my husband was dying and I read parts of Care of the Soul to him as he died on his request. As far as I'm concerned, it's all worth that one story, you know. It's worth all that. Now, if someone else comes along who's, you know, in some academic office somewhere and says, you are the master of light spirituality, all I can say is, well, what can I say? You know, okay, I'm light. You know, that's my nature. I'm not smart enough to be in the university, really. They kicked me out of one. I did, really, it's just the way it is. You know what I tell them sometimes? My father's a plumber. You know? As a result, I can plumb the depths, but I can't. I don't have a university heritage. You know what I mean? My family are all plumbers. I grew up sitting around a Christmas dinner talking about elbow joints and flanges. And that's where and Detroit, which is kind of a, you know, not exactly the intellectual capital of the world. And so I have rather humble beginnings, and I don't have a background of all of this. So I think that's where that criticism comes from. And, you know, it gets to me at times, but I mean, I canceled that subscription immediately.
Well, I've got two shorter ones now.
Okay.
And the first one was really about to say that I find your books quite hard to read.
Ah, yes. That's the other side.
That's the other side, yeah. But I was going to say, do you have a recommended method of reading your book? I find if you try and read 20 pages, then yeah. I've lost my way.
You're asleep.
If I read a page and a half and stop and think about it, that goes in better for me. Is that a good way to?
You know what my father does? My father loves to read, and you know he's a plumber, but he loves to read, and he makes a list of all the words he knows are not in the dictionary that I have used. And he keeps going to the dictionary, finding them, and he feels defeated. Finally, he found a word that began with MN, he told me. He said, there can't be a word beginning with MN. You know, mnemonics or something like that, you know. So right away. So, but I do get the feedback. You see, that I'm stuck here. I'm in the middle because I'm not smart enough in style for the academic world, and I'm too my language is not folksy enough for the, you know, for the popular world. And there's nothing in between, or there's very little in between. So I'm stuck, you know. I'm kind of stuck there. I don't. Many people say they really enjoy the books, but they don't read them necessarily. Or they may read here and there, you know. But I think I've also been advised by many friends not to try to make that easier, and I don't. My wife and I just published a book called Original Self. It hasn't been published, I think, in England yet. Hanley did woodcuts for each little essays, a page and a half. They're not easy reading, but they're short, so you can get through them without injury. But at any rate, I remember when I was doing that, I got a note back from the editor at the publishing house saying there's a word here called apotropaic in your book, and we can't find it in the dictionary. At our publishing house, we can't find that word. And they said, well, either drop it, they suggested, take it out, or put a little parentheses that explains the word, or put commas in explaining the word. So I wrote back and said, please let me have one word that nobody will understand.
Brilliant. Well, my last question is, I suspect on behalf of a lot of people here, who many of us lead mundane lives, and we're not intellectuals. So what do we do tomorrow? When we get up, we're going off to our ordinary jobs. What do we do tomorrow to take care of our souls?
There are certain things that I can tell you that the traditions have said are nourishing for the soul. Let me give you the list. They are friendship, number one. Friendship. So tomorrow, make sure you do something with, for, by your friends. Give friendship some attention. That is the key, they say. That's not my idea. It comes from long, long tradition, friendship. Ficino says this, Epicurus says this, many people who write about the soul, Plotinus. So that's the first thing. Secondly, beauty. Have some beauty in your day tomorrow. That gives to the soul. You don't have to understand it. In fact, it's better if you don't. Something beautiful that you apprehend simply for its beauty. And it stops you. It could be nature, it could be a painting, it could be a person, it could be a piece of wood, it could be anything, it could be a child. Let that. Third, children. People used to say, how do you get soul in your life? Children. I don't mean the inner child. I mean children, flesh and blood children. It's a good way to get nature. Give some time to nature. But if you notice, each of the things I've mentioned slows you down. Each of the things I mentioned, I could go further in the list, but they slow you down. You can't keep at your pace of doing all the things you need to do and have those things in your life. You can't. So the slowing down gradually, among the many things, each of these different things gives you. In general, what it does, it creates a life of contemplation, where you have to stop, and you can't keep being so busy doing the things that are so important for you. And it makes a mystic out of you eventually. And that's the goal of the soul work.
Tom, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.